I am 89 years old, and for the last 7 years, no one has said my name out loud. Not my son, who once looked up to me with wide-eyed admiration before life pulled him away into his own world of endless meetings and forgotten promises. Not my daughter, whose laughter used to fill this very apartment like sunlight, piercing through heavy curtains, but now echoes only in the faded photographs, tucked away in dusty drawers. Not even the neighbors who shuffle past my door with their hurried footsteps, occasionally pausing to listen to the muffled murmurs of my television that drones on through the thin, cracked walls at night. A constant companion in this silence that has become my prison. I live in a small apartment that smells of dust, old paper, and time that has settled like a heavy fog, clinging to every corner. Every faded wallpaper pattern that peels slightly at the edges, as if the building itself is shedding its memories, where clocks still tick loudly on the mantel. Their relentless rhythm, a cruel reminder that every second matters, especially when you don't have many left, each tick echoing in the emptiness, like a heartbeat slowing down, mocking the quiet desperation that has woven itself into the fabric of my days. I used to matter. That's the cruel part, the bitter irony that gnaws at me in the quiet hours. I was once the man people waited for, striding into boardrooms with an air of unassailable confidence. My voice booming across polished tables to quiet a room full of eager executives hanging on my every word. The man whose decisions changed lives, for better or worse, wielding power like a double-edged sword that cut paths through industries and fortunes alike. I wore suits tailored to perfection, shook hands with a grip that sealed deals worth millions, made promises. Some I kept with a flourish of success that elevated me to heights I never dreamed of as a young man scraping by in a post-war world. Others I buried deep enough in the recesses of my mind and the company's archives that I convinced myself they'd never surface again, forgotten casualties in the relentless march toward progress and profit. But age has a way of peeling everything away, layer by layer, stripping the facade until all that's left is the raw, exposed truth of a life lived too sharply, too selfishly perhaps, leaving me with arthritic hands that tremble when I try to hold a cup of tea, eyes that strain against the dim light of a single lamp, and a heart that beats with the weight of regrets I can no longer outrun. Now, I eat alone, at a scarred wooden table that once hosted family dinners filled with chatter and warmth, spooning cold soup from a can because cooking for one feels like an admission of defeat. I speak to no one except the occasional mutter to myself in the mirror, where I see a stranger staring back with hollow eyes and wrinkled skin that sags like the forgotten dreams of youth. And I wait, endlessly wait for something, anything, to break the monotony that has become my existence. Every Sunday, I sit by the window at 5 p.m., the faded armchair creaking under my frail weight, peering through grimy panes at the street below where life bustles on without me. It's a habit I can't break, rooted in the ghosts of better days when the doorbell would ring and my children would burst in with hugs and stories. Back when they still said "Dad" with affection instead of the curt "We're busy" that now punctuates our rare phone calls, if they come at all. I tell myself lies to survive, weaving fragile narratives in the quiet of my mind to stave off the encroaching despair. Maybe next week they'll remember. Maybe they're just busy with their own families and careers that I once encouraged them to pursue with the same ruthless ambition I embodied. Maybe they still care beneath the layers of resentment and distance that have grown like weeds in neglected soil, but hope gets thinner with age, fraying at the edges until it's little more than a threadbare illusion, barely enough to hold me together on the loneliest nights when the wind howls outside and the shadows in the room seem to whisper accusations of my failures. That night, the night everything changed, began like all the others, unremarkable in its solitude, with rain tapping softly against the window, like hesitant fingers seeking entry. The streetlight outside flickering erratically, struggling to stay alive much like me, casting erratic shadows that danced across the walls as if mocking my immobility. I had just finished a cold dinner of stale bread and cheese, the remnants scattered on a plate that I pushed away with a sigh, when I heard a knock, a sharp, insistent rap that shattered the stillness like a crack in ice. A knock, not the soft tap of a neighbor borrowing sugar or complaining about the noise, Not the hollow sound of the mail slot flapping with yet another bill or circular that I'd ignore until the pile grew too high, a real knock. Deliberate and unexpected, sending a jolt through my frail body that made my heart stop for a beat, then race with a fervor I hadn't felt in years. No one knocks on my door anymore. It's as if the world has erased my address from its collective memory, leaving me to fade into obscurity. So I stood there for a long moment, frozen in place, staring at the weathered wood of the door with its peeling paint and brass handle dulled by disuse, afraid that if I moved too fast, the sound would disappear like a dream you wake from too early, leaving only a lingering ache of what might have been. My hands trembled as I reached for the knob, turning it slowly, the hinges creaking in protest, as if the door itself resisted this intrusion into my isolated world. And when I opened it, a young man stood there on the threshold, soaked from the rain that dripped from his dark hair and clung to his coat like tears, his eyes wide with a mix of determination and something darker, perhaps anger or desperation, his breathing heavy as if he'd run here through the storm. "Sir," he said, his voice cutting through the patter of rain with a clarity that startled me. "I'm sorry to bother you, but are you Henry Collins?" No one had spoken my full name in years, not since the last awkward family gathering where it was uttered with strained politeness, and hearing it now was like a thunderclap, reviving parts of me I thought long dead, stirring a whirlwind of emotions, surprise, fear, a flicker of unwelcome curiosity. "Yes," I whispered, my voice raspy from disuse, barely audible over the distant rumble of thunder. He swallowed hard, his Adam's apple bobbing visibly, raindrops tracing paths down his pale face, and said, "My name is Daniel. I think you ruined my life." Those words hit harder than any illness ever could, piercing through the numbness that had encased me, sharper than the arthritis that plagued my joints, or the loneliness that clawed at my soul. They landed like a blow to the chest, forcing me to confront the shadows of my past that I had so carefully avoided. I invited him in, stepping aside with a gesture that felt foreign after so many years of solitude, watching as he entered hesitantly, his wet shoes leaving muddy prints on the threadbare rug, and as he sat across from me in the dim light of the living room, dripping rain onto my old carpet that absorbed it like forgotten sorrows, memories I thought were dead began to stir, rising from the depths like ghosts awakened from a long slumber. He spoke of a company I once ran, the empire I built from nothing in the cutthroat world of corporate mergers and acquisitions back in the 1980s, where every deal was a battlefield, and I was the general orchestrating victories that lined my pockets while crushing competitors. Of a deal I approved with a casual nod during a late-night meeting fueled by ambition and whiskey, a hostile takeover that dismantled a smaller firm overnight, leaving livelihoods in ruins. Of a signature I barely remembered placing on a piece of paper 40 years ago, scrawled in haste amid stacks of documents that blurred together in my relentless pursuit of dominance. A decision that seemed trivial at the time, but rippled outward like a stone thrown into a pond, creating waves that eventually drowned others. That decision destroyed his father, a mid-level manager at the acquired company who lost everything: his job, his savings, his dignity in the fallout, spiraling into depression and alcoholism that tore his family apart, leaving young Daniel to grow up in the wreckage, shuttled between foster homes and relatives who whispered about the man responsible, but never named him until recently, when old records surfaced in a dusty archive and pointed straight to me, which destroyed his family, fracturing bonds that could never be mended, his mother working multiple jobs to keep them afloat, while his siblings scattered to escape the shame, each carrying scars that manifested in broken relationships and unfulfilled potentials, which shaped his entire existence, turning a boy who might have dreamed big into a man haunted by what-ifs, driven by a need for closure that brought him to my door on this stormy night, his voice steady but laced with the tremor of suppressed rage as he recounted the chain of events that led from my boardroom to his shattered childhood. "I didn't come for money," he said, his eyes locking onto mine with an intensity that made me shift uncomfortably in my chair, the creak of the wood amplifying the tension in the room. "I came because I need to understand how someone could do that, and then live so long, untouched by the consequences while others suffered in silence. I had no answer, my mouth dry as I searched for words that wouldn't come. All I had were excuses, and excuses rot with time, decaying into hollow justifications that sounded pathetic even in my own mind. Defenses about market forces and business necessities that rang false in the face of his raw pain. For hours, we talked, or rather, he spoke with a passion that filled the room like smoke, unraveling the threads of his life story while I listened, truly listened for the first time in decades. Absorbing every detail without interruption, the weight of his words pressing down on me like the years I had accumulated, forcing me to confront the human cost of my ambition that I had always dismissed as collateral damage. As the clock ticked onward, the rain outside intensifying, then gradually subsiding, he painted pictures of birthdays missed because his father was too broken to celebrate, of school nights spent alone while his mother toiled away, of the anger that simmered within him until it boiled over into this quest for understanding. And through it all, I saw reflections of my own children, the distances I had created with my absences during their youth, prioritizing board meetings over bedtime stories, mergers over milestones, wondering if my legacy was not one of success, but of quiet devastation, echoed in multiple lives. When he finally stood to leave, stretching his legs with a weary sigh, the rain had stopped, leaving only the drip from the eaves and a fresh, cleansed scent wafting through the cracked window. The streetlight now steady in its glow as if the storm had purged its uncertainty. Before closing the door behind him, he turned back, his silhouette framed in the doorway against the night, and said something I will carry to my grave, his voice low but piercing. "You're not being punished now. Your punishment is that you're still here. Alone. With all of it." Words that hung in the air like a verdict, encapsulating the cruelty of my existence. The loneliness not as a happenstance but as a fitting sentence for the lives I had upended without a second thought. That night, after the door clicked shut and his footsteps faded down the hallway, I sat in the dark, the room enveloped in shadows that seemed deeper than before, and cried for the first time since my wife died 20 years ago, great heaving sobs that racked my frail body, tears streaming down my cheeks as the floodgates of suppressed emotion burst open, mourning not just her loss but the man I had become, the bridges I had burned, the echoes of pain I had inflicted that now reverberated back to me in this empty apartment. And the cruelest truth, the one that settled into my bones like the chill of the night air, was that that knock was the last one I ever received. No redemption followed. No family reconciliation sparked by this confrontation. Only the amplified silence that followed. Days turning into weeks where I replayed his words in my mind, examining the wreckage of my life with newfound clarity, realizing that in my pursuit of power, I had sown seeds of isolation that bloomed fully in my twilight years, leaving me to wither alone, the suspense of waiting for another knock that never came, the loneliness, a perpetual companion, the cruelty of outliving my relevance, and facing the unvarnished truth that some decisions, once made, echo eternally, shaping not just others' fates, but sealing my own in a tomb of regret and forgotten names.